Chapter 2. Lightning. Jay Walker fidgeted with the steering controls on his latest contraption. For the last few weeks, he'd been working on a jetpack hang glider hybrid with very little success. He hoped that once he perfected his invention, travel would be much easier for everyone, and more fun. But so far, his tests hadn't gone quite as well as he'd hoped. He had only barely been able to get off the ground last time, and he kept having problems with a fuel source. But this time would be different. This time he was going to fly. He pulled on a more aerodynamic jacket and strapped his goggles firmly over his face. Next, he strapped his glider on, and with a shaky breath, he looked out over Ninjago City. He had reasoned that if he could only start his flight from up high enough, that he would achieve more lift. So when his mom had asked him to run into town to grab a few things, he took the opportunity to test his theory. But now he was having second thoughts. He was up so high, so very high. What if the glider failed? Jay shook his head firmly. This wasn't going to fail. This time would be different. He gripped the handles on the glider wings tighter as he braced himself to jump off the edge of a 20-story building. He breathed deeply, then jumped. He pushed a button on the small handheld device in his left hand, and the engines ignited in his pack. With all his strength, he pulled his wings up to steer him away from the ground, which was hurtling towards him at an alarming rate. Just a few feet away from certain doom, he pulled up and began to fly through the air, up, up, up.
I did it! I did!
Suddenly, the engines sputtered out, and he was falling again. He tried desperately to reignite them, but they were out of fuel. He came crashing down onto one of the roofs of the other skyscrapers and very nearly broke a bone. But aside from a few bruises, he was fine. He sighed with frustration as he threw off his goggles and collapsed on the ground in a disgruntled heap. Well, at least this time he'd gotten lift. Jay looked up at the sun, then checked his watch. It was already 3:30. If he wanted to get the groceries and be home in time for dinner, he'd better hurry. So he scooped up his glider, folded it, and wore it as a backpack while he went to the grocery store. He opened the shop door and was greeted by a soft, tingling bell. He waved kindly to the lady behind the cash register, Mrs. Flynn, a very kind woman with dark brown hair and slanted eyes. Oh, testing another invention, I see.
Oh, just tinkering.
He didn't exactly like to talk about his inventions unless they actually worked. I saw the flight from here. Very impressive, young Walker. Mrs. Flynn was trying to be encouraging, but Jay's cheeks turned tomato red with embarrassment instead. He laughed an uncomfortable thank you and went into the produce section of the store. He wished there was somewhere he could store his very obvious backpack contraption, or maybe he could create a way for it to fold into a much more convenient, super compact...
Hey!
Two kids, which he went to school with, bumped past him, banging their fists against his jetpack. They jeered at him as they passed and mumbled nerd and geek freak under their breaths. Jay sighed again. It was bad enough he had to deal with this sort of thing at school, but sometimes it was just unbearable to run into kids like them in everyday places. He looked up and saw the other kids, two brothers, rejoin their mother, who was standing by her shopping cart and seemed to hardly notice them approach as she scanned the shelves. Jay silently envied them. It was rare that he would go somewhere with his mom, because both of them were always working. Either she was at the store and he was busy with chores or homework, or he was at the store and she was at home working. Well, her and his dad. Jay was born in a scrapyard called Ed and Edna's Scrap and Junk. His father primarily ran it, selling scrap metal to the army since he was too old to enlist, and they barely made ends meet as it was. His mom helped where she could. She organized donation events where people could come together to supply more scrap metal for the army, and would keep their household running seamlessly. Meanwhile, neither of them had any time to homeschool Jay, which had been his original curriculum up until middle school when the war started. So he was sent to public school in Ninjago City. Their junkyard was only a few minutes outside of city limits. He had a very hard time making friends there, mostly because he was seen as a very strange kid who came from a strange place and liked to tinker a lot by himself. He, like many other boys his age, had thought about joining the army, but he was only 16, so he'd be in for a long wait before he could do anything like that. Jay quickly roused himself from his thoughts and hurried to finish his errands. He paid for the groceries, then scampered out into the busy street where he struggled not to hit anyone passing by with his giant backpack glider. He headed to the bus station and got there just in time to catch the last bus heading toward his home, then sat among the crowd of people and was silent as the vehicle steadily bounced him around in his seat. When the bus stopped, there were very few people left riding it. Jay got out and looked around at the barren, dry landscape and the lush forests that lay beyond. Of all places to build a business, why such an ugly place, Jay thought. This was a large clearing outside the city where not very much grew aside from small tufts of yellow-green grass and a few scraggly bushes. The bus had dropped him off a few yards away from the junkyard proper. He still had to walk down a long strip of road before he reached his home, groceries and battered glider in hand. The junkyard was fairly old and, in some regards, tacky. It was a massive assortment of all kinds of odds and ends, mostly cars and motorbikes, surrounded by a wall of sandy stone with only one entrance, a big metal gate. Around the gate were twinkling lights in all the colors of the rainbow, and an illuminated sign which read, Ed and Edna Scrappin' Junk. Jay looked down at his watch again, then quickened his pace. He wound his way past some old carburetors and car batteries before arriving at a silver broken-down RV, which had a large rectangular storage container welded to the back of it for added living space. He dropped his glider outside the front door and went inside, calling out,
Mom, I'm home! The carrots are on sale, so I have some change for you.
He went into the kitchen to drop off the bags of groceries, but didn't find his mother in there. So he went to the nearby living room and stopped when he saw his father, an older man with a wrinkled, stubbly face and white hair slicked back, sitting on the couch with an old man in white robes who he had never seen before.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
His father looked up at him with sad green eyes.
Jay, honey, there's someone we'd like you to meet. This is Master Wu.
Pleasure to meet you.
Jay suddenly felt an odd mixture of tension and comfort, a knotting in his stomach, and a tingling in the back of his head.
Am I in some sort of trouble?
Not at all. However, there's something rather pressing which I need to speak with you about. Jay, what is your greatest aspiration?
My what? Aspiration? Well, guess it would be to help society with my inventions, make the world a better place and all that jazz.
That is a very noble aspiration, Jay. Very noble indeed. However, there may be a better way to achieve such a goal than constructing jetpacks.
How did you...
Jay, you may not know it yet, but there is something very special inside of you. And I need that special something. I am, in fact, the military advisor to the Imperial Army.
Are you saying that you need my help to fight in the war?
In a way, yes. But please keep this information quiet. I cannot stress enough the importance of this particular situation.
Whatever you say, Master Wu. Mom? Dad?
He turned to look at them with an expression that said, You knew all about this, didn't you? Edna gave a weak smile, and Ed shoved his hands into his pockets. Suddenly, Edna was smothering him in a hug.
Mom, what?
Oh, honey, we couldn't be more proud of you.
You mean you're actually gonna let me go? It's not ideal, but yes, we're letting you go. You need to, you see, oh gosh, how to explain this?
There will be no need, Edward. As I said before, this must be kept quiet. He will learn of everything he needs to know in due time.
Need to know? What do I need to know? Why all the secrecy? I'm trustworthy. What's going on exactly? Am I joining the army or a secret club?
Young Jay, it is not your trustworthiness which I am concerned for. In any case, there is nothing more I can tell you, except for this.
Wu walked over to him and laid a leathery hand on his shoulder. Suddenly, that knot in his stomach vanished, and Jay felt unbelievably calm. He reached into his robe and pulled out a small scroll, which he then gave to Jay.
You are completely free to drop out of school, as I've already made the arrangements. Now, unfortunately, time is short, and I must leave.
Wait, Master Wu. When will I see you again?
Very soon. Thank you for your hospitality.
They both nodded to each other, pain in their eyes. Wu left through the front door, and Jay watched him disappear beyond the junkyard gate.
Okay, spill it. What's all that about, really? And why are you so calm about this?
Edna looked half to tears as she gave her son another hug.
We're sorry, honey, but we can't tell you here.
But, why don't you open up that scroll?
Jay had completely forgotten about the scroll. He ripped it open and began reading the artful writing. Jay Walker, I realize that you must be very confused and have many questions, but answers will be supplied in due time. For now, report to the Yamadera Monastery in the Wayward Mountains outside of Ninjago City. There you will meet the woman Anne Jing Haruto. She is an ally of mine. Await further instructions.
Wait, further instructions?
This was all so mysterious. But why? Were there spies nearby? Were they safe?
Mom? Dad? I don't know if leaving you right now is the right thing. I mean, who's gonna help with the scrap, Dad? Jay, don't be ridiculous. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. This is your chance to make a big difference in the war. But what if... Jay, there'll be no arguing about this. You're going. And that's final. Dad, I don't want to argue. I get this is super important, but I just don't want to let you down. You won't, son. Now, what did that scroll say? Where does old Master Wu need you?
The rest of the evening was devoted to getting Jay ready for his trip to the monastery. Apparently, he needed to be ready to leave by morning. He was slightly shocked at how quickly this was all going, but he assumed the situation was dire, so he packed a large suitcase. Well, mostly Edna packed. For the journey he was apparently taking alone. Ed and Edna would be too busy at home to come with him. Plus, they were worried it might attract attention. Whose attention, Jay didn't know, but he was a bit too unsettled to ask. He knew about the skeleton army and how merciless they'd been to Ninjago. Everyone did. But they were not the sort of evil one whispers about in the dark of night, as if one might pop out of the very ground and slice your throat. Jay wanted to keep asking questions desperately, but he had been promised answers by Master Wu, and so he bit his tongue and waited for when he arrived at the monastery the next day. That night, Jay couldn't sleep. He kept tossing and turning, trying to wrap his head around everything. Every thought eventually led to a question, and each question only made him more frustrated. Mostly, though, he was nervous. He felt like a tremendous pressure had been put on him, and he was afraid of what that meant. There was also the fact that he would be leaving the only home he had ever known, leaving the only people whom he loved in order to fight in a war. Morning seemed to take an eternity to arrive, but once the sun was up, so was Jay. His stomach churned with that uneasy yet excited energy one sometimes gets before doing something drastic, and he didn't feel like eating very much breakfast. His mother and father watched him leave the junkyard in the cold, light morning air, and before he realized it, he was off on his own for the very first time.